So please join me in welcoming to the stage Maestro Man Aaron Dworkin.
Thank you, Michelle. Maestro Man, wow, okay, I hope I'm gonna be able to live up to it. I actually am just going to start before I say a single word with something more important than anything that I can say. The deepest defeat suffered by human beings is constituted by the difference between what one was capable of becoming and what one has in fact become. Now, Ashley Montagu was one of the great humanists and intellectuals of our time whose research and writings helped launch or contribute to significant social movements, including the emancipation of the disabled through his book, The Elephant Man, and the women's movement through his book, The Natural Superiority of Women. And when I hear his words, I think to myself, what shall I consider of those like young Randall, whose accomplishments not only meet expectations, but exceed what anyone might have thought them capable of? I actually have a bit of an unusual history, which I think probably would have made it very difficult for anyone to determine what I might be capable of becoming. Certainly by any statistical norms, being born a biracial baby on, of all days, September 11th, 1970, to an unwed white Irish Catholic mother and African-American Jehovah's Witness father in a small village outside of Monticello, New York, and being immediately given up for adoption, did not really set the stage for the highest expectations in terms of my future capabilities. Unfortunately, interracial marriage was still illegal in several states, and given society and other racial pressures of the time, my mother was forced to give me up for adoption. I was then adopted at the age of 2 weeks by a white Jewish couple in New York City who were originally from Chicago. They were professors in neural and behavioral science at Rockefeller University. They also had a biological son, my older brother, who is currently a professor in microbiology at Columbia University. So by the age of 13, curiosity had taken hold, and I began what was to become an almost 2-decade-long journey in search of my birth parents. And for those of you who don't know, it's very difficult for adoptees to find their birth parents. So it's all the more surprising than when, after all of my fruitless efforts, I was reunited with them about 9 years ago, at the age of 31, through, of all things, modern day, a website, adoption.com. So not only were my parents together, but I was to find they had eventually married, and I had a full sister. And we've since had the most amazing relationship. She attended my alma mater, the University of Michigan, and is now actually pursuing a law degree at Albany Law School in New York's capital. So people sometimes ask me why I care so much about diversity and do the work that I do, and I really have a pretty simple answer. I'm a black, white, Jewish, Irish, Catholic, Jehovah's Witness who plays the violin, so I have no choice but to do this. So just to get back to a little kind of my educational musical development, when I was 5 years old, my mom, my adoptive mom, who was an amateur violinist, really became kind of more motivated to play her instrument through some Milstein recordings of the unaccompanied Bach. And her practicing really inspired me. And as a result, I took a great interest in the instrument, began vigorously studying myself. And I was also very, very lucky early on to have one of the great Russian teachers who came to America, Vladimir Grafman, as my first teacher, who taught the likes of Joseph Gingold and others who, of course, then taught some of our great soloists today, like Joshua Bell. And I remember sitting in Carnegie Hall when I was 8 years old, listening to Isaac Stern perform, and the impact that experience had on me, and the sense of awe that it gave me about music, which has really stayed with me all of these years. But at the same time, I don't recollect seeing Sanford Allen, who you might ask is Sanford Allen. Well, in 1961, this young man sat on the stage of Carnegie Hall as not only the first black member of the New York Philharmonic in the orchestra's history, but as the first full-time African-American member of a major American orchestra. Unfortunately, I was only come to know of Sanford after founding Sphinx. So then I was 10 years old. My family moved from Manhattan to Hershey, Pennsylvania. So from one of the world's great metropolises to Hershey, Pennsylvania. A little bit difficult for me. And after beginning my studies in New York and at the 92nd Street Y and with Grafman, I continued. I went to Peabody Prep in Baltimore, took buses down there every weekend, and served as concertmaster of the Harrisburg Youth Symphony. I then spent my junior and senior year of high school at the Interlochen Arts Academy in Michigan. And after Interlochen, began my tenure as a college student at Penn State, where I was concertmaster of the Penn State Philharmonic, and then went on to finish my bachelor's and master's at the University of Michigan. And in all of those environments, I was either the only or one of less than a handful of minorities. And also, interestingly enough, it wasn't until I was working on my degrees at the University of Michigan that I first learned there were any black composers. I literally went into a lesson one day, and my teacher said, "Would you like to play some music by black composers?" And I kind of looked a little quizzically. I'm like, "You mean black classical composers? You want me to do jazz? Or I'm a serious classical violinist. What does this mean? What are you saying to me?" And he kind of smiled and began to pull volumes of works off of his shelves. And this really led to the incredible expansion of music that I performed as I began to focus on the works of black and Latino composers for both my undergraduate and graduate recitals. And it led me to again question, why had no one told me about William Grant Still, about Coleridge Taylor Perkinson, David Baker, Joseph Boulon St. George, an Afro-French contemporary of Mozart's, or the countless other minority composers whose accomplishments litter the annals of the classical music repertory? Why had no one told me about George Polgreen Bridgetower, a well-known black violin virtuoso who was good friends with Beethoven and premiered his famous Kreutzer Sonata with him in 1803 in Vienna, and for whom Beethoven wrote the work, which is why when you go to the original manuscript, you see the inscription, Sonata Mulatica composto per el mulatto. Why had no one told me that the great Frederick Douglass played the violin, or that his grandson, Joseph Douglass, was the first black violinist to tour the United States as a recitalist in the early 1900s. The violin you see depicted here belonged to Frederick Douglass. And so it was within the context of these questions and immersion in the incredible music, which I had recently become exposed to, combined with the lack of minorities that I would see on stage or whenever I went to orchestra concerts, that led me to founding the Sphinx organization. And I literally came into a lesson one day with my teacher and said, "Oh, I've got this idea." And it was also at this time that I began to reflect on all the feedback that I received as I was growing up from peers or adults. And unfortunately, their comments were not only not supportive of what I was doing, but they often sought to distance my music from my own cultural heritage. And that led me to authoring the title poem from my book of poetry that I wanted to share with you, entitled, "They Said I Wasn't Really Black." Born from white and brown young skins, I was so different from the pack. Adopted by Caucasians at just 2 weeks of age, they couldn't have known about the other people. They said I wasn't really black. A violinist I was destined for. Early on, I showed them the knack. It was Mozart for me and Beethoven too. I never got to memorize Jackson 5 lyrics, so they said I wasn't really black. School bells and cafeteria food, I sat there with my brown lunch sack. There was no fried chicken in my Ziploc bag, no confrontation between watermelon and black-eyed peas. They said I wasn't really black. I'd stroll into the rehearsal room wishing I was the Daddy Mac. I didn't even go to the games, let alone sport the jersey. Hell, I wasn't even in the band, and I wonder why. they said I wasn't really black. I didn't talk the talk and couldn't walk the walk. Familial precedent I did lack. At first it seemed correct by design. It took me years till I was uncomfortable when they said I wasn't really black. There were those who made me feel different and a few who I thought had my back. I could have taken all the racial slurs if only it wasn't my friends around when they said I wasn't really black. All I sought was acceptance, any click shell I could not crack. They feared the anomaly, too bad for me that I got good grades, couldn't play spades because they said I wasn't really black. And then it settled down on me, waiting unease upon my back, like the line and rhyme of these words I write. I had only just begun to fight when they said I wasn't really black. The first African queen I was to know drew me in like the sweet lilac. She shut those doors, supposedly wanted more, but I knew the reason behind, because they said I wasn't really black. For a time I had an afro. It should have got me on the track. Foolish me to think they'd see what I wanted to be. Why did they all have to agree? My skin was just a racial ghee. Hopelessly, eventually, they said I wasn't really black. I'm glad I found out that they were wrong. I ain't born in Uncle Tom's shack. I guess they wish that color was not what it is, but what they wanted it to be when they said I wasn't really black. I have come to terms with what I cannot fight. I yearn no longer to attack. The title I sought without emerged from within. There was serenity and complacency while impervious to chagrin when they said I wasn't really black. Every moment I burst with pride. I toss a memory in my sack. Their jibes ebb like the tide as I open the floodgates wide. It was quite a ride. Over now, save the rare aside. I wish I wouldn't have cried. I kind of hope they lied when they said I wasn't really black. So if today I'm to not only share,